What is going on, my friends? It's great to see you guys. My name is Ryan Williams, and in today's video, we are going to be talking about the best dividend stocks to buy in July of 2021. Now, there are 6 different stocks on my list to talk about today, and just so you guys know how I go about choosing these, I chose these 6 specific stocks just based on how they're currently valued, how they've been performing lately, and of course, because of their dividend stats, which we'll definitely talk about as well. And just so you guys are aware, I currently own 4 of these stocks we're going to be talking about today, and one of the other ones is one that I used to own in the past, but I ended up selling out of, but more on that later in the video. Anyway, before we get rocking and rolling, if you guys are stoked to learn about some dividend stocks today, please go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up. And if you're interested in seeing more videos from me, I would love it if you would subscribe to this channel so you can join me on my dividend stock investing journey. I'd love to have you along. Anyway, thank you guys so much for doing that. And now, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, my friends, now getting right into it. The very first stock that I think is going to be a good buy in the month of July is Campbell Soup Company, ticker symbol CPB. Now, in the last year, Campbell Soup, as we can see right here, is down about 7.75%. And if we mosey on over here, we can see that in the last month, it's taken quite a beating. So just in the last 30 days, Campbell Soup is down almost 5.5%, which in my opinion makes it a good stock to pick up right now while it's at about 5.5% of a discount. You know, if I didn't already have so much Campbell Soup in my portfolio, I would definitely pick up a few more shares this month, but it's already like 9% of my current portfolio value, so I don't want to do that right now, unfortunately. But anyway, because it's down about 5.5%, and also just because it really hasn't been performing that well in the last year, and even in the last 5 years, it's down about 27%. I would imagine that a lot of people don't have much faith in this stock or in this company, which could make Campbell Soup a good contrarian play, a good contrarian buy, a good stock to pick up, while people aren't as bullish on it. Now, as the great Warren Buffett said, be greedy when others are fearful, and I think that does somewhat apply to Campbell Soup right now. And despite the poor share price performance, guys, I think Campbell Soup, I'm pretty bullish on it myself. As I mentioned, I own it. It's a big chunk of my portfolio, but I think it's a really good long-term buy. It's a company that's been around forever. If we scroll down here, we can see that they were founded in 1869, and at least here in America, guys, Campbell Soup is a pretty iconic brand, a pretty iconic company. In my opinion, as far as brand goes, it's right up there with things like Coca-Cola or Pepsi, maybe a step below, but you know, you see Campbell's and you know exactly what it is. Anyway, moving on to the next point, just by looking at this PE ratio too, we can see that Campbell Soup might be pretty affordable. So it has a forward PE ratio of 15.71. And really, guys, if you can find a stock with a PE ratio in the teens, that's, you know, pretty good. That could indicate it's priced pretty affordably. But also, with that said, keep in mind the PE ratio is not the end-all be-all. It's just kind of a quick way to determine if the stock is priced affordably or not. But there is more to it than this. You can also look at things like price to books, price to free cash flow, which is something that we are going to be looking at with some of these other stocks today. But if you're looking for a quick metric to help judge if a stock is, you know, priced pretty fair, if it's a good time to buy it, if it's affordable, PE ratio is one that a lot of people look at. And 15.71, anything in the teens, that is A-okay in my book. Now let's move on to the dividend and talk about that. So if we scroll down here, we can see that Campbell Soup has a current dividend yield of 3.23%, which is not too shabby, and their payout ratio is sitting in a good range too. I've mentioned this in other videos, guys, but when I'm looking at the PE ratio, I like to find it between like 40 and 60%. And Campbell Soup is right smack dab in the middle of that range, guys, almost 51% payout ratio. That's what I like to see. Moving on, their 5-year growth rate is not very impressive in my opinion, but they've only been growing it for the last 2 years. So 5-year growth rate is almost 3%. Would love to see that higher, and we might see it higher as time goes on. And the years of dividend growth, would like to see that a little bit better too. But if we go over to this dividend history, we can see that even despite their measly 2 years of consecutive growth, Campbell Soup has been consistently paying out their dividends for the last 31 years. So although they haven't been growing it every single year for those 31 years, they've at least been paying it out and staying consistent with that for 31 years, which is a long time. That's longer than I've been alive. So in closing, I think Campbell's is a good long-term play. It's at quite a discount right now. And because it's, you know, taken such a hit as far as share price goes, I think that means there is some upside potential here that we may see. And so if you can get it at a lower price, you might as well. All right, guys, stock number 2 on our list today is one that I've been talking about in a handful of my recent videos. It's one of my favorite dividend stocks, and that is Altria Group, ticker symbol MO. Now, like Campbell Soup, we can see the Altria Group share price has taken a hit in the last month with a loss of about 4%, just over 4%. And this stock right here, guys, if you're not very familiar with it, this is one that a lot of dividend investors have in their portfolios because, number one, it's a high yielder, which we'll talk about, and also it's looked at as a pretty reliable dividend paying company, which is also something we're going to be talking about. But before we get to that, guys, let's look at the PE ratio real quick. So looking at this, we can see that Altria Group has an even lower PE ratio than Campbell Soup does, with a forward PE of 10.38 right here. It's almost too low if you ask me. I mean, I'm just kidding. I'm very happy to see a PE ratio this low. And also keep in mind, this is not the end-all be-all to determine affordability of a stock. I mentioned some other metrics earlier, price to book, price to cash flow, and if we go over here for Altria Group, we can see that their forward price to book is 23.58 and their forward price to cash flow is 9.75. Now, I want to talk about these two metrics just briefly real quick because I've never mentioned them before on my channel, and the reason that is because I'm just now learning about them. So I've done a little bit of research into these two metrics right here, and starting with the price to book, from my understanding of what I've read, an ideal price to book is like exactly 1. If you can find a stock with a price to book of 1 or less, you're right on the money. No pun intended, but with Altria Group, we can see that that is way higher than that. Their price to book is like 24. So even despite Altria's low PE ratio of 10 point something, their price to book is considerably higher than what we'd like to see it, 24 times. And if I understand this correctly, I'm thinking what this means is Altria Group's current share price is about 23.5 times more than the book price of each share of Altria Group. So the market has the share price of Altria Group considerably more expensive than the book price. But the inverse of this is true if we look at the price to cash flow, which compares the stock's current share price to the cash flow per share of each stock. And that's currently sitting at 9.75, or the forward price to cash flow is 9.75. Now, from my understanding, there's not like a set general rule of thumb to determine a good price to cash flow, at least from what I've read. But the closest thing that I have seen is people say that anything in the single digits is considered good, which is the case here with Altria Group. 9.75 is just under that threshold. So that combined with the PE ratio could indicate some affordability for Altria Group. But then again, this price to book indicates the opposite. So do with that information what you guys will, and if you guys have any feedback on this or any insight as to why this is, please leave me a comment below. As I mentioned, these are two metrics that I'm still learning a lot about, so I don't fully, completely understand them yet. And if my info is correct here, just what I've said, please correct me in the comments. I'd love to learn more about this stuff. So, all right, scrolling up, let's move on to Altria's dividend. So the current dividend yield of this stock is 7.22%, which is extremely high, guys. It's rare to find a dividend stock with a yield this high. They're very few and far between, which is one of the reasons a lot of people have this in their portfolio. It's such a high yielder, and it's also a pretty reliable stock to have. Moving over, talking about the payout ratio, this is a little bit higher than I like to see. Like I mentioned, guys, 40 to 60% is kind of where I like it to be, but this is, almost 75%. So I'd like to see this a little bit lower, but I'm not going to hold it against them too much. I still have a ton of Altria Group in my portfolio, and I'm going to be buying more as time goes on. Now, moving over to the 5-year growth rate, this is actually pretty acceptable to me. I'd be very happy with 8.75, 8.77, almost 9% growth every year, every 5 years, however often it is. And we can also see that Altria Group has been pretty committed to growing their dividends. So they currently have 17 years of consecutive dividend growth, which means they've grown their dividend year over year for the last 17 straight years. And if we scroll up here to the dividend history, we can see that they've been paying their dividends consecutively even longer for 51 straight years, which is like almost twice as long as I've been alive. So it's a very reliable dividend company. It's also a very high yielder, which is why a lot of people like to have it in their portfolio. And if you can get it at a little bit of a discount, which you might be able to right now, 4% down in the last month, you might as well take advantage of it. All right, guys, moving on to stock number 3, we have Johnson & Johnson, ticker symbol JNJ. Now, if you're a dividend investor, you've been dividend investing for a while, this is probably a stock that you already have in your portfolio. If not, if you don't have J&J and you're looking for a good healthcare stock, this one is a good one to buy. J&J has a lot going on, and for those of you who aren't too familiar with some of the brands they own, Johnson & Johnson owns brands like Band-Aid, Tylenol, Listerine, and I even think they own Lactaid, and I know they used to own Splenda, but they sold that off. But moving on, Johnson & Johnson, guys, if we click this in the last month, is down about 3.5%. Now, that's not a huge discount, but guys, any sort of dip, if you can buy stocks like this, which are great stocks to own long-term, if you can buy them at any sort of discount, you should take advantage of it. 3.5% off of $165 per share. What is that? That's maybe $6 or $7 less per share than you would otherwise pay. So, you know, if you're buying a good handful of these shares, that could save you 20, 30, 40 bucks, depending on how many you buy. And looking at Johnson & Johnson's PE ratio, it's not too shabby, also in the teens like the other stocks that we have talked about so far, currently sitting at a forward PE of 17.19, which means that even despite, you know, up 7% the last 6 months, up 4.5% year to date, and up 17.5% in the last year, it still could be a relatively affordable stock. Now, jumping over to the dividend page real quick, guys, Johnson & Johnson has a current dividend yield of 2.58%, which is the lowest we've seen today, but also, it's going to be the most reliable dividend we've seen so far today. So payout ratio is right in that sweet spot, guys, 44.38%. That's what I like to see. Okay, a 5-year growth rate of 6.04%. I even think that's pretty acceptable. I'd be happy with 6% growth year over year, or 6% growth every 5 years. And of course, I'm very happy with 58 consecutive years of dividend growth, which means for the last 58 years straight, they've grown their dividend every single year. Now, if that doesn't indicate reliability, I don't know what does. All right, my friends, stock number 4, we have JP Morgan Chase, ticker symbol JPM. Now, this is a stock that I used to have in my portfolio, but I sold out to pick up some shares of Main Street Capital Corporation and ORCC, Owl Rock Capital Corporation. And I have not decided yet if that was a good move or not, because JP Morgan is a good long-term financial stock to have in your portfolio. They've been killing it. I mean, at least in terms of appreciation. In the last year, they're up almost 58%. Just year to date, they're up 21%. In the last 6 months, 23.7%. But we get to this month, we see a different story. In the last month, JP Morgan is down about 5%, almost 5%. So just based on this performance here, you guys, it performs really well as far as appreciation goes. So if you can buy it at a little bit of a price discount as you can right now, jump on it. If you're looking for a good financial stock, this might be one to pick up. Moseying on over to the PE ratio, forward PE 11.65. That also indicates it's still pretty affordable. And if we go over to this value tab, I want to look at the price to book. So as I mentioned earlier, guys, a good price to book, what one should be looking for is as close to 1 as possible. And JP Morgan, as opposed to Altria Group, is very close to being right at 1. So 1.82. That's much better than what we saw with Altria Group, which I think was in the 20s, right? But this price to book is much more favorable. And when you combine that with the low PE ratio of 10 point something or 11, what is it? 11.65. It indicates that JP Morgan is still pretty affordable. Now, moving on over to the dividend, guys, JP Morgan also has a pretty impressive dividend stats here. So 2.34% current dividend yield, 27% payout ratio, which is the lowest we've seen so far today, a 5-year growth rate of 15.39%, which is very high. That's a lot of growth for the dividend, and they have been growing their dividend for the last 8 consecutive years. Now, I would like to see this a little bit higher. Typically 10 is a good kind of minimum number of years of growth to look for, but 8%, I mean, JP Morgan, I think they'll get to that 10. No problem. If we go over to the dividend history, even despite their 8 years of dividend growth, which it really isn't too bad, they have been paying their dividends for 25 consecutive years, which speaks to the reliability of the dividend of the stock. And you combine that with the really high 5-year growth rate, and I think you've got a good dividend growth stock to buy into. All right, guys, stock number 5 today, we have American Electric Power Company, ticker symbol AEP. Now, admittedly, this is one stock that I have never owned. I don't currently own it. It's not in my portfolio. It's not even on my watch list. But when doing some research for this video, I did stumble across this stock. And in the last month, it's really not at too much of a discount, just over 1%. But it looks like in the month of June, it really did take a bigger hit. And it's kind of moseying on back up. If we look at this chart right here, you can see it's still making its climb. And if you can get it right now at, $84.77 per share, about there, you've still got some appreciation you can go to. It looks like just Earlier this month, it was sitting at like $86 per share. In the last 6 months, where was it? What's the highest? Like $90 per share. So there is still some appreciation to be gained from owning this stock. So it might still not be a bad stock to buy into right now, especially looking at their PE ratio here. It's still in the teens, very low, 18.17 forward PE ratio. That's very nice. And if we go over to the value section, let's look at the price to book and the price to cash flow. So scrolling down right here. Okay, this is not too bad, guys. So price to book, the forward price to book of AEP is 1.93, which isn't too much higher than where we want it to be. And it looks like, just comparing the trailing 12 months to the forward price to book, it is coming down. So if that continues to be the case over time, it just speaks to the affordability of this company. And same thing with the price to cash flow. Remember, guys, anything in the single digit range is considered good. At least that's what I've read so far. And AEP is well within that, with a forward price to book of 7.42, which is also considerably less than the trailing 12 months. So it's coming down. Now, jumping on over to the dividend of AEP, guys, scrolling down, it's got a pretty decent dividend yield of 3.49%, a payout ratio that is, it's acceptable. I said 40 to 60%, but 63%, it's not too much higher, okay? 5-year growth rate is also a decent range. It's not too crazy out of control, 5.73%. That's manageable, guys, especially with the reliability of their growth. I mean, they've been growing their dividend for the last 16 consecutive years, and it looks like they've been paying them consecutively for about twice as long, 31 years straight of consecutive dividend payments. And looking at this dividend history, guys, let's check this out the last 10 years. So last 10 years, you can see that, yeah, it's slowly but surely making its way up year over year over year. That's really what we want to see, guys. And looking at this max too, you can see that it's just barely sloping upward, but that's what we want to see over time, just this trend going up. All right, guys, now the last stock that I want to talk about today is the Southern Company, ticker symbol SO. Now, I've covered some videos on Southern Company before. It's one of the bigger utility holdings in my portfolio, and I'm a big fan of the Southern Company. So we can see that in the last month, Southern Company is down almost 4%, so it's a slight discount, which means you might want to pick up a few shares before it recovers that 4% and then keeps climbing from there. And we can see that Southern Company is still pretty affordable. At least that's what's indicated by this forward PE ratio of 18.54. Now, I want to check out the price to book and price to cash flow of Southern Company real quick. So the forward price to book is a little bit high, so 2.13, and then the price to cash flow is actually pretty low, 8.66. So I don't know, even the 2.13, I don't think that's too high, especially when you compare it to Altria Group's price to book, which was like 10 times higher than what we're seeing here. And this price to cash flow is in a good range too. So it does seem that this stock is, or could be considered, an affordable buy right now. Now, if we move over to the dividend, let's check out some of these stats. So Southern Company has a current dividend yield of 4.29%, which is pretty high. I'm very happy with that dividend yield. A payout ratio that's a little bit higher, 80%. A 5-year growth rate that's really not high at all, 3.36%. I wish this was higher, but the current dividend yield is pretty high as it is. So this isn't as big of a deal in my opinion. And then the dividend growth, 19 consecutive years of dividend growth. That makes me very happy. Now, it looks like they've also been growing or not growing, but paying their dividend for the last 31 consecutive years. So that's quite a bit longer than they've been growing it, but it looks like they're making the effort to grow it year over year. I mean, 19 years, that's a pretty good track record. And if we zoom out a little bit here on the dividend history, look at that, trending up. That's what we like to see, guys. All right, my friends, well, that pretty much wraps it up for this video. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch and listen to me ramble about some of these dividend stocks. I hope it gives you some good ideas of stuff that you might be able to buy in this upcoming month of July. And I'm sure there are plenty of others out there that would be good buys as well. And with that said, if you guys have any on your list that you're looking to buy in July, please leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear which stocks you guys are looking at. Also, if you guys are still with me here at the end of this video, first of all, thank you for sticking through to the end. It means a lot. But also, if you have not done so already, please go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up before you click off to the next one, okay? I would really appreciate that. Anytime you like these videos, the more likes they get, it just pushes it out to more dividend investors here on YouTube. All right, guys, and with that said, I will now get out of your hair, okay? Thank you guys so much again for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good day, and I will see you in the next one.